Okay, let's come back to Babachir and Mr. Okay's case, because that is unfolding now. It seems to be getting to a concluding stage, I hope, because people are concerned that these seems to suggest that there are two sets of rules that is being used here to judge erring officials, government officials like Babachir and Mr. Okay. But if we're to go the way of not having that report released in the first place, and also looking at other agencies, institutions that have been somewhat diminished because of the singular action of setting up a panel led by the Vice President to look into the allegations against Babachir and Mr. Okay. What has happened to the judicial system itself? Shouldn't that be the first line of action to have stepped into this case, knowing that you have an AGF?
I'm sorry, I'm having difficulty with the sound, but if I get what you are saying.
Let me come again. Let me come again on the question.
Yes,
because
the last portion.
I'm asking you that because this seems to be setting two sets of rules for people to be judged in this country, because you have the Babachir case, and we have a presidential panel that has been set up instead of the courts to handle this, or the agencies that are responsible for fighting graft in this country to take the lead. But you have the presidency coming in first. That seems to take away from the institutions that should be fighting this corruption.
No, on the contrary, you know that in the case of Babachir and the ambassador, okay, I think that their investigation was escalated to that level because the lower levels had been muddled up. You recall very well. I mean, the tapes had just been played of Mr. Babachir, saying something to the effect that there was a witch hunt against him and these things were political and so on. So the prosecuting authority has got to get the right rudiment. They have to be armed properly with and to give it to the vice president. He's one of the finest lawyers this country has ever produced, and so therefore you can't afford to not construct your case properly so that it doesn't get to court and it is bungled. And so therefore, nothing says that the Attorney General or one has been denied their own job. All of it is leading, possibly, in the event that this is established, to prosecution. And when it gets to court, nobody wants that on day one, the judge will just throw out the matter and say, you guys are not serious.
Prosecution. Mr. Shehu, did you say possibly to prosecution?
Yeah, possibly, because if any agency has reached the conclusion that any of these two has committed a prosecutable offense, they will obviously go ahead to prosecute.
Okay, but they committed an offense strong enough to be sacked, but not strong enough to be prosecuted, depending on whichever agency looks at it?
The president, the Constitution is very clear about who has which powers, obviously. The president has executive powers vested in him. Beyond that, there are specialized agencies, even within the executive arm of government, to undertake these things. I don't think you'll be happy yourself if you live in a country where your president or your governor is also the prosecutor and possibly the judge. That would be democracy.
Which is also why we asked the question, the fact that the presidency had to step in to set up that panel when there are agencies vested with the powers to handle such situations. And now you're saying the agencies still have to come in and do it. Are we not wasting resources here?
No, on the contrary, as I said, because of the modeling of these matters, the National Assembly was there up in front on these matters, and the people so concerned were convinced that that they were being set up by political opposition and all of that. So therefore, government wants to see that the prosecution agencies do this job. Now, as it is, the likely thing is that the president will say, take this report, they scrutinize it, and they can form their own independent judgment on what to do. If by all means they determine that there is no basis for prosecution, it's entirely their domain. If they determine that there is basis for prosecution, it's entirely their own thing to do. Okay,
Mr. Shehu, if I may come in here, this issue of, again, the documents will go to the agencies for them to look at and determine that, okay, they have prosecutorial basis to go ahead. Now, we're looking at time running here, so let's step back a bit. It took the Vice President's panel a couple of weeks to get the report done. It took the President about 6 months to act on it. Some will say it took just a couple of weeks to do investigation, and then to act on the results of the investigation took about 6 months. How are we building trust in this anti-graft war?
Well, let me say to you that, as I said earlier, that give it to the President, that the President has a view, which, with due apologies to you, you and I don't have. The set of facts that are racked up against him, in front of him, you'll be amazed by it. I don't know the scale of it. That's one thing. And two, given the way that the justice system, moves in this country, you won't believe it, but you know that as we speak now, there are anti-corruption cases instituted by President Olusegun Obasanjo's administration that are still before the courts in this country. They have not been adjudicated upon. And so therefore, what are we talking about?
Just give us a moment. We need to go to a quick break, but we'll be back and conclude this segment in just a moment. Join us again.